Today is a day for old friends and new allies, but it's also when things start to go awry for the Payday gang. There was another angle to the Payday storyline that had been operating unnoticed. Someone somewhere was pulling strings from behind a curtain, and neither Bain nor Garret fully anticipated what would happen next. Jiro's search for his son was about to take center stage. Kento had to be found, but it wasn't just sentiment driving this search anymore. Sadly, it was unlikely to be a happy reunion. For this is the story of Payday. Vlad was back. I mean, it was Christmas. You can't have Christmas without Kozak. The crew had just recently expanded their arsenal with a shipment coming in from Wick's people over at the Continental, and Gage finding yet more ways to package and modify their assault weapons. So Vlad thought it was high time to go big this year, not aiming to hit quiet industrial DC or head to the sticks as the gang did the year before. Instead, he was sending them into Midtown America Mall at the height of the festive season. This one was bound to get messy. Yet again, he trusted Harudin with moving his product, who in a mad panic decided to hide the coke in whatever gifts he could find around the mall. The fool, dressed this time as a mall Santa, had overdone the booze once again, and after being apprehended by the police for acting suspiciously and the misdemeanor of public intoxication, he put Vlad's coke smuggling ring in great peril of being exposed. This time though, Bain had the crew on standby, and although the central location of the mall would mean a fast police response time, they were more than ready for Vlad's usual madness. Bain was sending in the Core 4 after all. After freeing Vlad's stepbrother from his police interrogators, they set about locating the gifts filled with his coke. These hiding places included expensive gift bottles of wine, prized jewelry displays, and even VR headsets. After locating all remnants of Vlad's shipment, as well as securing a few gifts of their own, Bain called in Bile to first drop C4 to blow out the mall's skylight, and then returned to winch the crew out of danger. If it wasn't for the crew saving a relative of Vlad's, Dallas wondered whether he was trying to get them killed, demanding that they escape on the base of a building-sized Christmas tree that hardly provided ample cover. Either way, Vlad got his damn tree, and the crew got paid. From their report, it seemed the FBI was none the wiser to Operation Stealing Christmas's true purpose, and Vlad was able to keep his product flowing around the capital. Oh, and those new weapons worked pretty well. Speaking of munitions, the crew had been tipped off during the safe house warming party earlier that the Butcher was expanding her operations to the East Coast, and may have been in need of muscle to enforce this transition smoothly. She'd actually been running weapons in the Caribbean for a while now, drawing plenty of attention from neighbouring cartels whose smuggling efforts were far less sophisticated and well backed. So when it came to sending her first convoy to the waters of the Magic City, her vessel, the Meerswine, was hit with full force by the pretending kings of Miami, the Sousas. They killed her men, claimed her weapons, set fire to her ship, and documented the entire event in gory detail, sending the Butcher images of their brutality along with a threat. Sousa says stay out. You see, the Sousa cartel had been at the pinnacle of the Florida criminal pyramid since the mid-80s, prying that crown from the infamous Tony Montana during their hit on his Miami Beach mansion back in 1983. However, they had yet to run into a force like the Payday gang. Just maybe the spirit of Scarface would get his revenge yet. The Butcher contacted Bain, who in turn assembled a squad ready to mobilize immediately. A quartet of Dallas, Chains, Jiro and Sydney packed their bags for Florida. Sousa's number was up, and a third party seemed to smell that in the water. Upon touching down, instead of being greeted by Bain's usual insider entourage for pre-infiltration planning, a diminutive man met the fore with a cocksure smirk. He introduced himself as Tony Montana, the name of the man whose fall from grace some 30 years prior had heralded the Sousa's meteoric rise. To those he was less acquainted with, he was known as Scarface. This man told the group under no uncertain terms that if Ernesto Sousa, the now head of the family, was going to die, he was going to do so by his hand. Normally, someone like Sydney would laugh at the idea of some foreign stranger getting in the way of Payday gang business, but this man was enigmatic. You could tell he was made for more, and he claimed to have once owned the mansion itself. In a brief exchange with Dallas, Bain not only cleared him to assist in the mission, but effective immediately, extended to him an invitation into the Payday gang. I'm sure Sydney wasn't impressed after all she'd had to go through for a chance with the crew. What's stranger, Bain didn't even sound surprised when Dallas rang to inform him of what had transpired. It was almost like he knew, sending over a new custom mask which paired perfectly with Montana's devil-may-care attitude for the task at hand. Before they could launch the Butcher's campaign for revenge, we have to consider just who this Scarface was. He wasn't Tony Montana, at least not the one you may have heard of. In this universe, the events of the 1980s were no work of fiction. The real Scarface was a Cuban refugee who'd wanted for more, reached the pinnacle of East Coast criminality before falling victim to his own hubris and substance abuse, being caught between the law and the Sousas. Scarface was dead, but his spirit may live on just yet. The man now going by the name of Tony Montana, who stood before the Payday gang, wasn't just some cheap imitation. Whether he was a relative, an old friend, or just a fanatical copycat, one thing was for sure: his knowledge of the Scarface mansion was real. Without a doubt, he was a Cuban national, and certainly he had the capacity to become public enemy number one, as the first Montana did 30 years prior. Tony Montana reincarnated or not, he believed he was Scarface. That's all that mattered. The depths of his delusion played into his favour. His hatred for the Sousas was very real, and so were his skills. He was no bank robber, nor was he a subtle operator, but Tony dealt in absolutes. His weapon, affectionately known as the Little Friend, was modified with a 40mm grenade launcher, allowing him to breach and clear ruthlessly. Tony also carried with him an injector filled with adrenaline, which could put him into a trance-like state where pain was no longer a barrier. Madman or not, he was Payday gang material, and now he had the opportunity to prove just that, as well as enhance the legend of Scarface. Back on Miami Beach, the now 5-person squad entered the mansion's compound silently. Thanks to the intel provided by Tony, the crew were in knowing the external henchmen were simply lookouts, meaning the higher-ranking mansion guards would be none the wiser if they could be taken out silently. Scarface knew exactly where he'd find Ernesto Souza. They'd have to prise open the Grand Villa to have a chance at his life. However, the police reports received by the DCPD recount this as a hit, so something must have gone wrong. Or right, as Tony would have seen it, seeing red once he spotted the head of security at the pier head. Things went aloud. After alerting the Sousas to their presence, the plan changed. Now it was about coaxing the rat out of his hole. Using a security USB, they hacked entrance into the mansion, tearing it to pieces. They set fire to the Sousas' collection of priceless art and called in Bile to dump and destroy their vintage cars. Ernesto had strange taste in art. Shady figures, men at sea, a pyramid. Surely he wasn't also obsessed with that hoax they'd seen at the Mckendrick Museum. It was a hoax, right? In any case, the Sousas weren't about to allow everything their family had claimed those 30 years ago go up in flames without a fight. Ernesto unleashed turrets, his personal guard, and finally emerged himself, heavily armoured and armed. Tony saw his chance and unleashed his explosive fury upon the Sousa patriarch. The death of the Sousa cartel mirrored that of the Montana cartel almost poetically. Scarface's smirk must have been wider still under that mask. Before fleeing, they opened up the mansion's hidden vault, escaping with millions of dollars worth of yayo and even more dirty money. The Butcher was also delighted. Her reputation was bound to grow, and Miami might as well have been handed to her on a silver platter. She'd have more work for them very soon, but for now, a fellow crew member was in need. Wick had asked for little since joining the gang, simply appreciating not having to work alone for once in his life. But now, his old organisation, the Continental, had come knocking. They needed Wick for another job. Upon informing Bain, the legendary hitman was surprised to hear that the mastermind behind Crimenet didn't view the Continental as competition. Instead, he was interested in how the org's currency, Continental coins, could change how Crimenet went about its business. He signed off for Wick to be joined by a core group of heisters to do the Continental's bidding. It hadn't been Crimenet's policy before to involve themselves in other criminal syndicates, but the Continental had just too much sway and firepower to be ignored. Essentially, the crew, sent to Brooklyn, New York for this job, were to be escorts, taking up positions to overwatch Sharon, the apparent concierge of the Continental Hotel, as he carried a secretive package for delivery with the Continental's regards. As anticipated, other unwelcome elements sought out said package. The gang provided covering fire from a derelict apartment building, whilst drawing most of the armed police response away from Sharon. The gang fought over a nearby building site to again keep Sharon in their sights, spotting and taking out snipers holed up in the sprawling downtown complexes. They recovered the item which Sharon requested, a metal briefcase locked away with marked cash and unregistered weapons. This was clearly not a good neighborhood. Upon ziplining down the elevator shaft to meet up with Sharon, the crew prepared for their escape, calling in Twitch to come in amongst where the police had set up a roadblock, knowing that this would be the route out that the responding NYPD would not anticipate. They fled the scene with Wick's old friend suffering little more than a graze. That's the kind of professionalism that gets contracts signed. The Continental was now open to the Payday gang. For his part, Sharon wouldn't forget that he owed Wick and his new friends, a debt he'd look to pay almost immediately. Sharon drew Bain's attention to an exclusive fundraising party being hosted by none other than Mayor Mckendrick, knowing the DC mayor was no friend to Crimenet. I suppose it's fitting that when you bite the hand that feeds, that hand may well turn hostile, as was the case with the good mayor and Crimenet. The Payday gang had put Mckendrick in power during election day. He'd repaid them by installing Garret, Winters and the anti-Payday task force. So if he thought re-election was on the cards, he had another thing coming. Sharon informed the crew that this party would be taking place on a luxury yacht, anchored on the East River and owned by a conservative advocate of Mckendrick's, Ethan Powell. On board would be some of his most influential sponsors alongside his fraudulently gained campaign funds, likely stashed around the boat. That wasn't enough though. Sharon wanted his debt paid in full, so he further dug up evidence of a remote server that would be on board with access to all of the mayor's offshore accounts. Mckendrick wasn't loved by the people. If he was to see executive power again, it would be purely on the back of the palms he could grease. By siphoning this money out, the gang could exact their poetic revenge and bolster their own offshore balances. Mckendrick's speech on the bridge of the yacht provided just the distraction needed. Entering from the stern via speedboat, Wick was joined by Payday's stealthier elements to pull off this robbery in silence. The four identified a laptop which held the temporary locations of his sponsorship funds, hidden throughout the yacht in place of lifeboats and stashed wherever they wouldn't be found. These wrapped bundles of cash could be bagged up and tossed out to the open water for the pickup boat to snag later on. The setting of this heist made any unsuspecting members of Mckendrick's security team easy prey, and even easier to dispose of. After liberating all the liquid cash funds, the crew returned to the laptop to unlock entrance to the boat's server room. Here they were able to overheat the servers, allowing an override to be activated. With Mckendrick's financial hard drive now exposed, the crew had all they needed to ruin the man who'd caused them so many issues in the past. This heist was so well executed, knowledge of it happening was limited only to Mckendrick's inner circle, as the corrupt mayor would soon be the first political casualty of Bain's new America, and Wick was able to again concentrate purely on the Payday gang's future. A future that was about to become very uncertain. You see, Vlad had arrived at the safe house. Normally, this meant trouble, but this visit was irregular. He knew something or someone was moving against the gang, but made little attempt to clarify who or what. He simply wanted to see how much the crew knew. Meanwhile, Dragon had started to become distant. Something was wrong. Surely the butcher couldn't have been involved. With distrust suddenly sown in and outside the gang, things were only compounded when a mysterious letter arrived at the safe house. Esther Tate was all that was written upon it. Surely that couldn't mean... No. Vernon Locke was the only one with real answers, and for Jiro, this had even more meaning.
It all started with Vernon Locke getting in touch. He said he had information that someone was out to destroy us, and he knew of a time and place where we could intercept an agent of this unknown enemy. That shifty mercenary is a lying bastard, but we still had to investigate, of course.
Crimenet had wronged many people, but few in time had lived long enough to harbour that hatred. Just who could be working to bring them down? In any case, Locke had been given the go-ahead by Bain to conduct an investigation into this individual, sending the Core 4 alongside Jiro to apprehend and interrogate the man if needs must. Returning to the French embassy in Manhattan, which had served as the location of one of their first ever heists during the New York spree, they laid low to anticipate the arrival of Locke's apparent mark, who the IT specialist had been tracking for weeks. To everyone's utter amazement, who should come rounding the corner but Matt Roscoe, ex-cellmate of Hoxton's and one-time would-be betrayer of the Payday gang. The recognition was immediate and mutual. Roscoe turned where he stood, fleeing at breakneck pace. The crew began pursuing his van yet again on foot. The irony wasn't lost on Dallas and Company. Roughly 5 years apart, the same streets running through Manhattan, Heat Street was playing out all over again. More unbelievably, someone had tried to warn them. Locke called for his man Eddie to help the gang pursue Roscoe in a vehicle, but potshots taken by Wolf had already drawn police attention, and like deja vu, he too was shot up when attempting to pass through a blockade. Carrying on foot, in the wake of a speeding ambulance and whilst fighting off well-drilled New York police responders, the crew found that Matt had again ran his car off the road. Naturally, it was time to burn him out, like last time. History again would repeat itself. With a now badly burnt Roscoe emerging from the furnace of his vehicle, the gang were quick to force him further down the road to a planned pickup site, laid out in advance if things got messy. Under extreme police pressure, they had to loop back around, escaping using the elevated road up the highway, which they already knew could accommodate an escaped chopper from all those years prior. With Roscoe bound and on board, it was time to return to the safe house and hand him over to the specialists. Wolf and Jacket had a knack for these things.
Roscoe would not tell us anything about the threat against us or who he was working for. But he told me he knew of a Yakuza member named Kazuo who was imprisoned in a Long Island correctional facility.
Somehow, Matt Roscoe was more afraid of his new employer than he was the Payday gang. His stay in Crimenet HQ must have been hell on earth, and yet somehow all they got from him was a name: Kazuo. Jiro tucked this information to Bain with the intent, but not the means, to hunt the man down. Another stage breakout would be too great a risk, especially knowing little of the area and with the threat of this unknown group looming large. Instead, Bain saw it fit to call on a number of his contacts within the penitentiary to engineer a prison riot. A violent uprising against the US justice system was right up his alley, and it had the desired effect of initiating high-profile prisoner transfers away to another prison. If Hoxton's breakout had taught them anything, it was that prisoners in transit were easy game for the Payday gang. Wolf, Houston and Sydney joined Jiro on the flight back to New York. They were taking a massive risk on information given by Matt Roscoe. It was clear Bain feared whomever this group represented. The plan was more radical than anything the gang had attempted before. The Payday members waited to ambush the prison convoy on Green Bridge, whilst Bain's other insiders were tasked with mounting plastic explosive to the bridge's support beams. The intention was to trap their vehicles on the mainline side of the bridge, preventing a return to the fortified prison. They succeeded, but at a cost. The initial controlled explosion ignited fuel from a nearby engine, and whilst many civilians were able to flee their cars, others were undoubtedly caught in the blast. Quite frankly, if you want some insight into the depths to which Bain was willing to sink in order to protect Crimenet, look no further. Green Bridge was a damn massacre. After the secondary explosion prevented any of the transports from moving, the four assaulted the convoy with full force, decimating their poorly armed detail and soaring through with portable circular saws, which Wolf often carried as backups. Any other prisoners that escaped during the assault would be worthwhile collateral, distracting the police efforts to recover order and stability on the bridge. In the back of one vehicle, Kazuo was immediately recognizable. He was a Yakuza alright, Jiro could see that at a glance. The crew proceeded to escort the prisoner along the bridge and to the top of nearby scaffolding. Here, a Fulton balloon system was already prepared to get Kazuo to safety one way or another. Seeing how well Vlad's goats travelled using a similar system, Bain was inspired, calling on another inside man, a pilot named George, to time this flyby extraction whilst under fire from a turret-mounted police chopper. The snagging process was successful, but the whiplash must have been something else. However, before they could check on the state of their VIP, they had to get themselves off the bridge first, pushing hard against the police blockades towards the mainland, where they could finally flee the bridge using a maintenance stairwell built into one of its support pillars.
Kazuo wouldn't tell me everything, but we now know that Kento is still in the US, and he's working for the Yakuza. Does he know I'm alive? Does he remember where he's from? I don't know. I must find him, and then I will have my answers. And another question remains. Who is planning to attack the Payday gang? Roscoe is not telling us everything. I think he's more afraid of his employer than of us.
Whilst the gang received little reassurance for their efforts and remained at the mercy of this unknown threat, the news was enough for Jiro. His son was alive. A reunion was within his grasp. Bain, on the other hand, was becoming reclusive, more so than usual, hastening plans and setting into motion events that would change not only the fate of the Payday gang, but likely the entirety of the US. He had to assemble the final members of his team for one last heist, but with this unknown threat at large, recruitment was an innate danger. So he turned to a man he could trust. Gage was a snake in the grass, but he'd had so many chances to betray Bain whilst under extreme police scrutiny in the past, it was clear he was loyal, even if he had little choice not to be. As a dealer and smuggler, it shouldn't be a surprise that Gage had contacts over the Mexican border. And it just so happened a famed Sicario contact of his was itching to earn his keep without relying on others' blood money. When approached by Gage with Bain's offer to become the 18th member of the Payday gang, the man, Antonio Macatazo Benitez Rodriguez, grasped the offer with both hands, crossing the border with a weapon shipment taken straight from his former employers, a major cartel in his homeland of Monterrey. With that, he took on a new name, Sangres. The Mexican national was a skilled murderer who paid respect to those whose lives he cut short with his Dia de los Muertos-inspired mask. A crack shot with his .44 Castigo revolvers, he showed ambidexterity befitting his hitman trade. Sangres offered the Payday gang a cold-blooded edge that would be necessary in the fight to come. Not long after his arrival on the US side of the border, Sangres was called off from his planned arrival in Washington. Bain was transferring the entire gang out of DC, as Locke had made first contact since the Heat Street incident. Yet Locke's proposed job had nothing to do with Kento. Simply, he was selling weapons to the butcher. Maybe Dragon's suspicious behaviour had been merited. Just what was Locke up to sitting on weapons shipments? What could he need muscle for when the butcher was another close contact of Bain's? Whatever it was, Bain wanted insurance out of town where the deal was taking place. Dallas, Hoxton, Wolf and Chains being sent personally to mediate the transfer of arms taking place in an Alaskan shipyard, with other members asked to wait in the wings should something go wrong. You should know, this Alaskan deal would change Crimenet irrevocably. What's more, Garret had started to receive letters. A greater power was on the move. As ever, thank you very much to my Mean Infamy patrons and above. If you want to join that infamous club to see yourself in the credits or get early exclusive access to my videos, including the story videos, check out my Patreon, link below. Remember the Discord is open to all if you crave some more Payday discussion. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all very soon for the next one.